Hello, everybody. It is a Sunday and it is March 16th, 2025 at 1 p.m. Eastern. And I apologize. I guess I forgot to record a promotional video to give people a heads up. I think I decided to do it yesterday, largely because so many important things have happened and I wanted to share some of my thoughts, but also hear your thoughts and your questions. And I'm going to be on an airplane on Wednesday when I typically do a live stream. So I'm doing the live stream now. So I want to start out with talking about the fact that the Democrats in the Senate aligned with the GOP and passed the temporary funding bill so the government wouldn't shut down. It's a 6-month bill. And I am very aware that I am not a politician and I don't know what politicians know. I am commenting as a citizen whose expertise is brainwashing, mind control, and my studies of the cult of Trump, psychological warfare. So I'm going to be commenting from my expertise. And to be honest, we won't know if it was a good decision or a terrible decision that Chuck Schumer and 11 other Democratic senators voted to keep the government functioning. I was confused. I did research. I talked with colleagues. And essentially, I was persuaded that it was a strategic warfare error if we did allow the government to shut down. And because our enemies, Putin, Trump, and other libertarians and fossil fuel corporations, they want to gut our Medicare, our Medicaid, our Social Security, and other programs, and it would provide the perfect excuse to blame the Democrats to do what they're planning to do anyway. And in this way, we're buying 6 months to get our act together. And the fact that the Democrats are not on the same page, to me as a citizen, tells me that they don't understand that this is not politics as usual, that we have a hostile takeover of the United States of America by forces that want to destroy our hegemony, that want to destroy the US dollar, that wants to defund our systems of checks and balances, separation of church and state, our human rights legislations, women's rights, gay rights, trans rights, indigenous rights, want to attack minorities. So I really feel like we need to get together and have a correct diagnosis and stop applying the past politics to today. We're in a different world. And so we're in the world of psychological warfare. And to combat psychological warfare, it's not enough to just teach people to critically think or to be able to discern what's disinformation from misinformation. I really believe the methodology that I've evolved over 50 years, having left the Moonies cult through a deprogramming in 1976, offers the framework that people need to understand to approach what's happening as a public health crisis. We have a virus, a mind virus, and I want to shout out to my friend and colleague Eve Messer, who's a former LaRouche member, who's been another combatant along with me, John Atack, and Joe Zimhart, and so many others against our respective former cults. But he wrote a whole book on how mind control is a virus. And we've heard Musk talking about the woke virus, but this is distraction and diverting people's attention. So I'm going to ask Jerry if you can put up the influence continuum for one moment. This is a downloadable PDF, and it explains ethical influence from unethical influence. Ethical influence respects people's rights, their authentic self. It's love-based. It respects conscience, critical thinking, free will. And on the other side is authoritarian brainwashing or mind control, which I describe as the bite model of authoritarian control, that talks about creating a pseudo-identity that's based on hate and doctrine and obedience and dependency. So you can go to freedomofmind.com, download this. You can go and print up lots of copies and start, or PDFs, put them on your Facebook pages, whatever. The point is we need to educate everyone to understand brainwashing and mind control, and in particular, former members who've already left cults or people who've left authoritarian regimes. If they understand the influence continuum graphic and have the bite model graphic, that's also free and downloadable on freedomofmind.com. This is the fundamental tool we need to start educating everyone to get on the same page, because we want to operate on the ethical side of the influence continuum. And there are many, many forces paid by authoritarian cults that want to confuse people, want to say there's no such thing as mind control, no such thing as brainwashing, etc. Just like big tobacco said there's no link between smoking and cancer, or fossil fuels have used my former cult, the Moonies, Washington Times, to say there's no such thing as climate science, real climate science. So we really need to get back to reality and educate people and understand we're in an emergency situation, and this is not normal, and we can't expect things to be normal. It's going to get worse. So with that, I want to just say, avoid black and white, all or nothing, good versus evil thinking. Be open to learn, reason, and we will figure out how to correctly diagnose what's happening. There's a couple more things I want to say before I start responding to questions. I'll do it briefly. I want to just call everyone's attention to the massive protests that are happening in Serbia and Hungary, anti-Putin protests in Europe, who just can't believe that Americans are allowing Trump and Putin to take over the most powerful nation in the world. But so they're protesting, and we're doing protests, which is great. We need to do a lot more, but guess what? The media is not covering us. So we are going to need to develop platforms. We're going to need to use our social media platforms to get the word out. We need to have trust spheres with information that's not propaganda, it's not lies, but is reliable. So that's the other thing I wanted to say. The last thing I want to say is there are many people leaving the cult of Trump. And if that word doesn't work for you, the cult, they're leaving MAGA. They're leaving the belief that they did the good thing to vote for Trump and the GOP. People are angry as heck, especially veterans who've been fired, because 1/3 of our civil service is staffed by veterans, and they are screaming and yelling at the GOP. We want to thank them. We want to befriend them. We want to welcome them. So it's very important. And then lastly, before I start responding to two more things, I want to say that way it looks to me, we should be reaching out to our family and friends who are currently in the military service. And we should be asking them this question, which sounds outrageous, but I think we should be asking them this question. If you're given an order to shoot live bullets at peaceful protesters of fellow Americans, would you obey that order? And I'm asking you to reach out to people to do a preemptive conversation, because Trump had Hegseth fire the top judiciary in the military, the people who would issue the orders to say it's a legal thing to do or it's an illegal thing to do. He fired them. So what's been set up is this cult of total loyalty and obedience. And I'm counting on veterans and I'm counting on people currently in the military to do their duty, their sworn duty to uphold the Constitution and not follow a fascist dictator and harm their family, their friends, their community members. And then lastly, before I take questions, Jerry, I asked you, can you put up a graphic that Media Matters created showing some of the prevalence of MAGA media versus the Democratic media? This has been put together. The size of the bubbles is how large the audience is. Take a look at how many reds there are and take a look at how many blues there are. And you will understand why the GOP won by a sliver. Because they're controlling. Thanks, Jerry. You could take it down now. Because basically the eye of the bite model is information control. And if people are listening and trusting right-wing politicians and pundits, rather, and they get their news from pundits, then they're going to believe that. And I want people to look at all sides and consider what the MAGA is hearing. But I also think we have to really start understanding we're in psychological warfare, people, and we're unarmed. Most people think they're walking around with the myth of invulnerability. Oh, I could never be mind controlled. I could never be in a cult. But you're talking to a fellow who got tricked into the Moonies in 1974, and I got my identity completely hacked to the point where I believed the same crap that's happening today, that democracy is satanic, we need a theocracy, and that the Constitution be amended and make it a capital offense when people break our rules. I thought that was a great idea as a Moonie. I got deprogrammed, and when I realized, oh my goodness, how did they do this? Now you're meeting me 49 years later, 4 books later, a doctoral dissertation later, and there are tens of millions of ex-members. But we need to get our messaging in line with each other. And what I'm seeing with former cult members is they're all building their own channels, but they're not explaining brainwashing and mind control in a simple, easy way. And if you have an easier form than the influence continuum and bite model, please email me at center@freedomofmind.com. I'm eager to find something that works better. In the meantime, this is my stream, and that's what I want to say. I'm ready to take comments and questions now, folks. Let's see. Oh, I also should say TikTok banned my live streams from my last live stream. So just FYI, there is censorship. Del Stromy, well, why does the FBI director have cryptos on his Facebook? You haven't heard Trump said he wants to make America the crypto capital of the world? Because he was sworn loyalty to his boss. And if you haven't been following me for years, I've been talking about crypto as a scam. And that reminds me of multi-level marketing cults, commercial cults that I'm very aware of, where the people who start the scam at the top make a fortune and everyone else gets tricked into thinking they're going to make a lot of money, and they all lose money. And think about it. If everybody goes to crypto, then there's no need for US dollar. Then we don't pay for road repair, police, fire, hospitals, Medicare, Social Security. There's no dollar. So just understand, crypto is not healthy, not happy. Oh, and think about quantum computers who can hack blockchain. It's another element to consider. Let's see. Code says, what happens if a member of one cult meets a member of another cult, wondering what their interaction would be like? Well, I can answer from my own experience, because as a Moonie, I met Hare Krishnas, Scientologists, Children of God, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons. I try to recruit them, and they try to recruit me. It's as simple as that. And this opens the door for a very important point, which is that when you're in a mind control cult, you believe you have the truth with a capital T. You think you're following God. If it's a religious cult, you're following the truth, and everyone else is deluded, or with Satan. This black and white, all or nothing, good versus evil, us versus them ideology. So direct, trying to recruit someone into another cult doesn't work, or trying to use facts to tell the person they're following a cult or a false messiah or apostle doesn't work. But talk about bite model and influence continuum with Chinese communist brainwashing and pimps and traffickers. And I did some posts recently about Andrew Tate, who's a trafficker. Talk about something else and ask questions. Ask them what they think of this bite model in terms of that or this. The goal is to empower people to start thinking for themselves, to question things. Let's see, we have another person's emigre in Canada. I wonder, why is Trump so loved by some, and why can others not stand him? Why are we who can't listen to him different? It's a good question. I can tell you, as a Moonie, I loved Sun Myung Moon. I thought he was the greatest man in human history. I was so brainwashed. I couldn't see anything but my projections of the greatest man on earth. And I believe it's a similar phenomenon with people who follow Trump. They project all of the nonsense that they've been indoctrinated with, that he's like a King Cyrus figure, he's sinful, but God is using him, or he's a great man, etc. And the other thing I want to say is that the world is different now because we're online. And where our brains, our personal data has been used, AI is being used to manipulate us unconsciously. And that's why I tell people to really choose how much time you spend online, where you spend time, and understand that there's subtle manipulations happening. And that's why we always need to come back to family, friends, things that anchor us in real life. And we need to build community in real life. Let's see, Lucretia Barnes. Will we know ahead of time when Trump will have his supporters attack us? Thank you. Well, I just read a AP article that they're deporting immigrants, even though the judge told them not, that they didn't have the power to do so. So they're attacking some of us. But as far as what my comments with the military maybe is what you're asking, I think the prediction is that as there are bigger and bigger mass protests, that's when the Trump might pull out the military to enforce law and order. And if you haven't heard the term false flag, or you're not aware that how dictators have created an excuse for violence against their citizens, is they hire gang members or thugs to be violent against the police, and then that causes the justification for violence. But I'm not telling you this to keep you from protesting. I think it's really valuable to show everyone that they're not alone and that we have to resist. But I do think that we have to also have these conversations with our friends and family in the military and get them thinking about this, because this is going to be a crisis of conscience for every single vet. So Code, has a cult leader ever realized what they were doing is wrong and decide to dismantle his cult? I seem to remember over 49 years a few small cult leaders realizing it. And they typically were born in a cult and never got deprogrammed or learned about brainwashing or mind control, or they got recruited into a cult. But the key thing is that what we now see as cult leaders, they have a personality disorder. And in chapter 3 of The Cult of Trump, I compared Trump with Jim Jones of the People's Temple, Sun Myung Moon, my former cult, and Hubbard of Scientology. And these people have a personality disorder. And the theory is lack of secure attachment in their childhood, that Eric Fromm called malignant narcissism. And I have a free downloadable on my freedomofmind.com website about these attributes. And it's not just narcissism, but it's thinking you're above the law, the pathological lying, the sadism, the paranoia, the revenge seeking. There's a whole list. And guess what? Eric Fromm got that from analyzing Adolf Hitler. And over the years, people said, you can't compare Trump with Hitler. And I'm like, yeah, but he has the same malignant narcissistic personality. He's a dangerous person. Forensic psychiatrist Bandy Lee edited a big book on the dangerous case of Donald Trump that was initially a New York Times bestseller and then got banned. And there were, I think, 37 psychiatrists and mental health experts who said Trump was dangerous and should never be anywhere near the seat of power, much less twice. Let's see, Renee Jan, 1992. No one is taking about Trump's mental state or Elon's. I think you mean talking. And sure we are. I mean, George Conway did a whole psycho pack, before the election. Bandy Lee continues to do her messaging. I'm on Substack, and I definitely invite you to please join my FOM community on Substack. I have thousands of subscribers, and more people are realizing they want me to do more. So they're offering to contribute $8 a month to help keep the messaging going. And I do want to make a course on how to talk to MAGA folks and other people who've been hacked into cults. That's my next project coming out. Yes, no one's talking about how to discern dis and misinformation. So the difference between the two is disinformation is intentional lying. And by the way, there's no such thing as an alternative fact. It's called a lie. And misinformation is unintentional, incorrect information. So, and many good people are putting out misinformation. And I'm begging people to check your facts, check with trustworthy sources before you message online. And it's always good to be ready to change your mind if you realize that you said something or did something that turned out to not be a good idea or it was wrong. I do. Let's see, no more water. 100. Where would you direct us to find resources and tools to help diagnose and treat this illness that will cause the suffering of so many if we continue to ignore it? Come to Freedom of Mind. I do a podcast. I have a Substack. I have a huge YouTube channel. And I interview top experts. Last week, I interviewed a cybersecurity expert, former parliamentarian. Actually, this week was for Joe Zimhart. The week before was Maritza Shaka from Stanford Cybersecurity. I have a great podcast coming out tomorrow with a former member of the Kabbalah Learning Center cult, the one Madonna is in. Her family was some of the first followers of the Bergs, and she was what was called a Hevra, inner core labor traffic victim type person, left when she was 18, was suicidal, and she's now a business professor at a university in Australia and wrote a great book on finding your true purpose. and I highly recommend it for all former members. That's coming out within 24 hours. Let's see, Kathleen, expecting the Congress people in the system to correct their own psychological dysfunction is insane. I disagree. I think most people in Congress, if they haven't been manipulated by lobbyists, I think they're good people. I just don't think people understand that we have been under psychological attack for decades, that laws have been dismantled, that think tanks have been set up. I did a great interview with Gareth Gore about the Opus Dei cult, the one that thinks the Pope is satanic, the one that gave money to Leonard Leo to put the Supreme Court right-wingers in, and Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 project, Opus Dei. I wrote about them in The Cult of Trump as well. So we need to out religions that are actually authoritarian cults, that don't give informed consent, that don't encourage people to follow their conscience, that manipulate them, control them, and create a pseudo identity. That's where the world looks at Americans and saying, just because the IRS said it was a religion doesn't make it a real religion in the sense of truly existing for the benefit of others. Let's see, QnA 6, to break a cult mindset, how to finally come to your conclusion you have been conned. So what I want to say is that what doesn't work ever is attacking the leader, the doctrine, or the policies directly. What doesn't work is using facts and logic to try to persuade them that they're wrong and you're right. Doesn't work. It activates the cult identity to defend and feel like you're persecuting them. What does work is to be warm, respectful, curious, and ask questions in a genuine way that makes them think. And asking them questions like right now, there's this huge division in MAGA, people who think Musk is good and people like Bannon and his war room that say that he hates Musk. So there's this division. So it would be an easy ask to say, I'm curious, what do you think of Musk? And if they say, oh, he's great, then you ask them, well, what do you think of what Bannon is saying about Musk? Have you listened to his arguments? And you just be patient. You wait for an answer. You do a follow-up question and a follow-up question and a follow-up question, because people will come to their own realization, especially if you ask them to go back in time before they joined the cult or before they believed in Trump, for example. When I ask people, what's your first memory of Donald Trump? They often say to me, they saw him on The Apprentice, or they saw him in the tabloids cheating on his pregnant wife. And so that's a good starting point to say, oh, that makes me curious. So if that was your first impression, tell me where you started to change your mind about him. And seriously, warm, respectful curiosity is going to help the person to help themselves get out. I wrote the dark blue book that's over this shoulder called Freedom of Mind, Helping Loved Ones Leave Controlling People, Cults, and Beliefs. I highly recommend reading that one. Another question from Kathleen. The majority of Congress people are members of a privileged class. They are removed from the people they work for. Some are, but I don't know. I don't think so. I think there's a lot of people who are regular people, especially women who got involved with politics as they realized that it had been too long dominated by white men or men. So I'm not sure that I would generalize that way. And likewise, I also think it's a big mistake to demonize all billionaires. And I've heard that messaging, all billionaires are evil. I don't agree. And I think we need billionaires, and there are over 200 billionaires who are not in the cult of Trump. And we need their help. We need the resources. We need to develop alternative media platforms that aren't pushing right-wing propaganda. We need alternative social media. So we need help, and we need people with resources who care about their children. And this brings up another big point that I want to make for people, and that is we need to think about our children and our grandchildren and the future of the planet. We need to have a positive future vision that we're working towards. Right now, we're against things going in the wrong direction, but ultimately, to power us, we need to think of a better future, and not just going into the deep dark hole. Let's see. Reach for the wind. This is more than a cult, Doctor. The MAGA people have had their basic understanding of truth eroded to nothing. I beg to differ. Uh, my my basic understanding of truth was eroded in the Moonies. I know many friends who are in many different cults, and when you step back and have a perspective, there are differences between political cults, religious cults, therapy cults, cults of personality. There are differences. And likewise, there's also differences along the pyramid. Most people are what I call fringe members, and they have no clue. Thanks, Jerry. They have no clue what's going on inside or at the top of the pyramid. And so people, like, they can look at Tom Cruise touting Scientology, see him as a successful actor, and say, what's wrong with Scientology? And they've never talked to someone who signed a billion-year contract, who has worked as slave labor in the Sea Org. They've never talked to someone who is harassed and threatened by the cult, as I have. Let's see. Renee, is it okay to stop having relationships with family that are MAGA? I think you see MAGA, not mega. For me, you have to protect yourself. And if you are resourceless and you feel traumatized, then of course protect yourself. But if you're asking me what's going to help in the long run, it's to remain warmly connected. And that's a universal that I tell all families that call me asking for coaching, asking my team for coaching. We want to encourage people to have warm relationships with people in cults. Talk about other things than politics. Remind them of their past. Share pictures, videos. Talk about sports. Talk about the weather. Stop trying to argue. Stop trying to persuade them. Seriously. And if you're like me, and this is my profession, but if you ask me, what do? I want them to persuade me to join their side. I want to ask questions and engage their motivation to convert me. Please convert me to Scientology. Tell me what your understanding of Harvard is. I'd really like to understand what you know and what books you've read and what courses you've taken. So, but this is my profession. Let's see. Mitch, hi, Dr. Hassan. The American Psychiatric Association has now gagged me on Facebook because I kept posting interviews with Dr. Bandy Lee, and they finally blocked me on Facebook. So the American Psychiatric Association, it appears, has been heavily lobbied by Big Pharma, and there are powers that be that do not want mental health professionals explaining about the psychology of fascism, the psychology of dangerous cult leaders. And it is a failure of their institutional obligation to the public that they're muzzling experts in this field. So what can I say? I used to be on every major television show. I used to be on CNN and MSNBC all the time, and I haven't been asked for over a year. I think the last show I was on was Joy Reid, maybe a year and a half ago. They've been told by their advertisers, by their editors, their producers, we're not going to talk about cults. We're not going to talk about dangerous mind controllers. And shame on them is all I can say. Let's see, wandering adjective. Adjective, that's an interesting name. How can you respond or work with people who are now leaving MAGA only when it is personally affected them? No empathy prior. How can I work with them? Easily. Why? Because I left a frickin' cult. I have sympathy for them. I have compassion for them. I want to welcome them. I want to thank them. The last thing we want to say to people leaving MAGA is, I told you so, I told you so. Screw you, you voted for him. Is that really going to help us depolarize the American public to be together against fascism? No. So welcome them, be warm to them. My next door neighbor, when I got deprogrammed, Monica, bless her heart, one of my oldest friends, baked me chocolate chip cookies and told me, welcome home, Steve. Touched my heart then. It touches my heart 49 years later when I remember that act of love and kindness and compassion. Let's see, Dizzy, how do we reprogram so many Americans? I really think we need to start locally with people we know, people who are willing to talk with us. And in terms of scaling it to bigger audiences, this is why I'm live streaming on YouTube and Instagram and any platform I can. And we're recording this. So if you have other family members and friends who are critical of what's happening with the Trump administration, you can get the link to this recording, ask them to watch it, and ask them to come to Stephen Hassan's Substack and start listening to my podcast, which is on the Midas Touch Network. Step by step, if we can get a few billionaires to say, like Barry Seid gave $1.6 billion to Leonard Leo, the guy who did the Federalist Society, who put the justices on the Supreme Court. If we can get some billionaires to give us $1 billion, $2 billion, we'd build media platforms. We would be training clinicians, media people, journalists. We'd be doing training programs for former cult members. And we would be developing online messaging that's easy to understand, catchy. And if you're a designer, if you're a messenger, we need help. We need to amplify the simple fact that psychology has been advancing since MK Ultra, where the CIA was fighting the KGB to develop mind control. It just keeps advancing, and it's pretty sophisticated now. So what are we going to do? We're going to tell everybody what mind control is, how to tell, how to reveal the true sources behind things, and we're going to call criminals criminal and not just kowtow. Oh, we know that Donald Trump won't like it, so we're not going to say anything. Kowtowing to Hitler got us into a situation where there was a violent military world war. And the new warfare, if you haven't noticed, is online, and it's psychological warfare. And who's going to win? I bet on people who can think and use their creativity and use AI and social media platforms. That's where I'm putting my energy. Are news organizations reporting protests, not reporting protests because of money? I don't know. I don't know. But I can tell you that a conservative bought CNN and fired a bunch of people who were very progressive on CNN. So it could be ideology and it could be money. I know that the tech bros, the Bezos and Zuckerberg and Musk, they didn't want regulation. They didn't want restrictions. They didn't want to be sued. Google didn't want to be sued as a monopoly. So guess who they supported in the election? And again, this is not forward thinking. K. Clock, lack of empathy is one of the defining characteristics of sociopaths. So true. In a recent interview, Elon Musk said that empathy is the fundamental weakness of Western culture. How do we fight against this? Well, I think he said that in response to Jane Fonda's comments at the awards, the SAG Awards, where she talked about empathy. Empathy is a critical feature of narcissism. Lack of empathy is one of the critical features of narcissism. They can feign empathy, but they don't really feel it for the other person. And what can I say? Love, and now I'm going to sound syrupy, I bet, but I believe love is stronger than mind control. I believe truth is stronger than lies. And in the end, we can't allow a few powerful people to ruin the world for the rest of us. And like I said, we should be thinking about the future, thinking about the future of the global climate. We should be thinking about our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. You know, indigenous people make decisions, I'm told, based on 7 generations of their ancestors and 7 generations of future children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren. Erin cares. Have you ever thought about writing a book about cult mind control for young people? I worry about my kids online, and I imagine this will be a problem for their generation. I have thought about it. I know of at least one ex-Mormon who wrote a book about mind control for children. We need more. We need more content for different populations to kind of target people's interests. I highly recommend for children, the Center for Humane Technology has a documentary that came out, I guess, about 5-6 years ago called The Social Dilemma. I recommend watching it with your children, no matter how old they are, even if they're in their 20s, if they haven't watched it, because it talks about how executives who built social media weren't even letting their own kids on social media, and how it was all about capitalizing people's attention spans so they could make more advertising revenue. And it's a must-see. The Center for Humane Technology has a podcast that I regularly listen to called Your Undivided Attention by Tristan Harris and Asa Raskin. Disclosure, I was on it. I was interviewed years ago on it. Very important stuff. Let's see, double catfish. I have serious concerns about the way the Trump administration has come in like a wrecking ball, hitting everyone with so many hardline changes. It appears to be an intentional strategy. You haven't heard of Project 2025? Heritage Foundation? We tried to warn everybody. Trump said, Project 2025? Never heard of it. Or Project 2025? No. But he lies. He's a pathological liar. This was all outlined. And Putin's strategy, and he calls it active, it's not he, it existed before Putin with the KGB. They did what's called active measures. And because they didn't have a really good military force, they would do psychological warfare. And much of their technique is you throw a whole bunch of shit, pardon my French, on the wall and see what sticks. And if some Americans start looking at that piece of shit over there, then you bring your people in, you put bots, you amplify it, you monetize it, you get Americans to influence other Americans. And the overload technique is a military strategy. And guess what? It's very effective. You know why? Because our brains can only handle a minimal amount of information at any given moment. So it's overwhelmed. Let's see. PT Grit. Capitalism needs people to be brainwashed and promotes individuality. I guess I can say I'm a capitalist who believes in regulations and checks and balances. I'm not a communist. I'm not a true socialist, but I can say that greed and bullying and threatening, and this brings up another point I wanted to make, which is that the Koch Corporation that's done so much harm has been pushing free speech. Musk has been pushing free speech, Zuckerberg. But guess what? They don't want free speech when it comes to anything that harms them or their businesses. So they'll sue people to shut them down. But they use it as a device to justify doing the messaging that they're doing, which is not respectful, is not honest, and it is mind control. And if you look at my BITE model, information control, the first three things is deception, deliberately lying, withholding vital information, or distorting information. And all mind control cultists use those, all three. Let's see, Nancy Wallace, super sticker, $1.99. Thank you, Nancy. Written on top of a heart. Cindy, is J.D. Vance going to keep up Trump's plans if Trump passes away? So J.D. Vance was selected by, my understanding is Peter Thiel and Musk, because he will be doing exactly what he's ordered to do, and by Putin. And he's really not a leader, and he switched 180 degrees if you followed his career. And there's lots more I can say about that, but the bottom line is no, Vance is not a solution at all. The interesting thing for me is that with the rebellion against Putin, if Putin gets taken out or he dies of a heart attack or something, the question is who's going to follow up in his footsteps, and will he designate an heir, or will there be a power struggle? I know I've been to Russia when the Soviet Union collapsed, and it was and is a mind control society. But I can tell you, people are not happy there. They survive, but they're not happy at all. We've been so spoiled in the United States of America in the last 70 years, and I've been around, and I've gotten to experience the best in human history of what America has to offer. But we're spoiled compared to what other countries have and people have had to go through. And we need to get it together and stop pretending somehow there'll be elections in 2 years or 4 years where we can take power back. No, they don't want to give power back. They want to be king. He wants to be king. Exactly what the founders of and the writers of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution were about. They did not want Donald Trump figure. Misty Hughes, how can we break through? They are so far in, and Fox and other misinformation keeps them believing the misinformation, and Trump's trying his best to get rid of real news. Yeah, it's not going to be simple. It's not going to be easy, but it starts with thinking about what's within your control. You. What can you do? And I say, educate yourself, and then don't overextend yourself, but do what you can. Help one person they'll help another person. They'll help 2 people. They'll help 5 people. I have, I think, 116,000 people on Instagram. It'd be nice to have 1 million. How could I get 1 million? If you know an influencer on Instagram that has 5 million people and say, hey, listen to Hassan, what do you think? And they listen and they realize, oh, Steve actually is an expert on brainwashing and mind control. He wrote The Cult of Trump. Good guy. Then maybe some of their followers will come and join. So that's what I'm thinking, is we need to get to the people with the resources, the influencers, the people with the financial clout and the connections, educate them, and we need to have a strategy that makes sense based on the facts. And I have many other colleagues who've been researching this stuff and warning people for years. We still know what we know, and let's understand the war, and let's map out strategy. And I'm definitely stating we need our own media. Right now I'm broadcasting on YouTube and Instagram. I don't know how long this will be available to me, to be honest. I like to think it's going to be available and I won't be censored. But I did a Dismantling QAnon TEDx talk with Dave Troy for TEDx Mid-Atlantic. And it's been taken offline as hate speech. And it was just explaining it was psychological warfare operation. And at the time, we didn't even name Michael Flynn as one of the originators, one of the original people involved with it. But it got taken offline. And so I'm backing up all my stuff because I'm not expecting that it will be online in the United States. So I need to find another place, another country that has internet. And by the way, do you think China has an open internet for its citizens, or Russia? No. Are there people who are hackers who can use VPNs and try to hack the system? Sure. That's the hope, right? But America's not going to, the way it's looking, they're not going to want people who are going to be truth telling, that are going to be able to talk strategy on how to take their followers away from them. So I invite you to read my books, take my online course. If you're a clinician, take my course. It even gives you CE credits. Let's see, how are we doing? I have about 7 minutes left. Morwin Willow, do you know if Trump or Elon have ever been in therapy? I think it should be mandatory for leaders. No, I don't know if they've been in therapy. I know Elon has been taking a lot of ketamine because he's depressed. I know he's Asperger's. Most malignant narcissists would never trust a therapist. But interestingly, my former teacher, who is now deceased, Daniel P. Brown, wrote a textbook on attachment repair for adults. And it is possible to help people who are born with a personality disorder to develop a healthy sense of self. But it takes a couple of years of effort with a good trained therapist to do that. Michael Fisher, what are your predictions for what will happen over the next couple of years? Unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball, and I'm one of those people who likes to be optimistic, but also likes to be realistic. And I've just been working my butt off since The Cult of Trump first came out in 2019. Because it should have sold millions of copies and people would have been educated about the history of psychological warfare and how we got here and what to do about it. I think it's sold about 80,000 copies, which is good for a book, but people really need to read it or listen to the audiobook now before it gets banned. So my predictions are: be flexible. Don't expect things to be normal. And climate change is definitely going to get worse because we have now fossil fuel restrictions coming off that the Biden administration put into place. So that I predict is going to get worse. And I predict that AI will continue to get more and more evolved. And even the top experts have been warning that they may not think the way humans think. And it's called the alignment problem, that they may not be aligned with human values and human needs. And that's a big question mark because we've increasingly become reliant on AI. Nancy Wallace, reading RJL's book on thought reform, Robert J. Lifton, my mentor, whose book helped me get out of the Moonies. He speaks of how liberals come across as weak because, unlike authoritarians, we consider others' opinions, practice empathy. How to remedy this? Well, I believe we can be clear and confident with what we know, but if you were raised in an authoritarian cult, or if you were raised by an authoritarian parent that did corporal punishment and made you be obedient, your child brain got conditioned to listen to authority figures who speak that way and threaten to hurt you. And it will take a lot of growing up developmentally to realize that we're not children anymore, we're adults, and that real maturity is where you have active listening skills and you're prepared to change your mind, but where you can also be really firm. I'm really, 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 really firm that brainwashing and mind control exists. Why? Because it frickin' happened to me. And my family and my friends knew me before, and I turned into a right-wing fascist. I turned against my country. I turned against my religion. I'm Jewish. I turned against my poetry. I was a creative writing major and threw out my poetry. And if I was given a rifle and told to shoot civilians, I would have done it without hesitation. I know it's real. And it horrified me when I got out of the cult. So I've spent 49 years wanting to learn about social psychology, wanting to learn about hypnosis, and tell everybody about it. So please take advantage of my expertise and my body of work and my colleagues who've also labored long and hard to share their experiences, like John Atak coming out of Scientology, Joe Zimhart coming out of Agni Yoga and Church Universal and Triumphant, John Collins coming out of the Message Church, John Dehlin coming out of the Mormons. I could go on and on. Thank you, Michael Fisher, for your super chat. Thanks for reading my question. Appreciate you. I would like to do more live streams and engage people, but I've been funding all of my efforts with my consultation fees, and honestly, I need more help, and I'd like to do less individual consultations, train others who work for me, supervise them, and develop more programs, more courses, more books, more videos, and do more live streams. So help me, please. Join my Substack and start listening and sharing my podcasts. And like I said, if you know any super influencers, have a conversation. Tell them what you learned today, and come to Freedom of Mind and check it out. Let's see, Holly, Dr. Hassan, maybe you could describe a reflection statement. That way people can understand. I'm not sure what you mean by describe a reflection statement. So maybe you can write something and explain that, or we're kind of running out of time for this live stream. Unfortunately, I'm not around on Wednesday, and I'll be at a conference in Northern California, and we'll do another live stream 2 Wednesdays from now as I'm wrapping up. And let me just say, avoid black and white, all or nothing, good versus evil thinking. Avoid thinking that everyone who supports Trump is permanently brainwashed, because they're not. You can definitely call out bad behavior. I think it's really terrible that you did this, but don't say you're a moron and you're a terrible person, is my strong recommendation. I'm also a therapist, so I'm sharing that as well. Don't be personal about it. And remind people who they were before they got radicalized. I know people are having dissonance from being exposed to this tragedy. Avoid the tendency to want to just binge watch videos or ignore it or wishful think, and ignore the tendency to give up or want to harm yourself, because life is precious. So hug your wife, your husband, your kid, your neighbor, dance, listen to great music, enjoy nature, and let's work together to keep our country from falling apart and going fascist. And with that, I'm going to thank my team who was helping me today on a Sunday, and we'll have the video recordings of this up on YouTube and wherever else, I'm not even sure. And come join my Substack, and check out my podcast tomorrow with Debbie Haskey-Leventhal about the Kabbalah Center, which is an awful group. Thanks so much. Take care.